Welcome to Frictionless Commerce, the show for manufacturing and distribution leaders who need digital commerce to deliver on its promise. I'm your host, Matt Johnson. In each episode, we go behind the walls into the data, systems, and processes that drive success. No silver bullets, no hype. I'm here to bring clarity to digital leaders about how transformation works across the supply chain. Most distributors think that their product data problem is an internal execution problem, but there's a structural problem underneath that most people don't talk about. And that is manufacturer product data is built for manufacturers. And the partial solutions that most teams have put in place, from data aggregators to industry standards, help but don't eliminate this gap. In this episode, I'm going to help you name the translation problem clearly and hopefully leave you with 3 practical ways that you can close the gap on your terms. If you're ready to grow, let's go. Let me be very clear in naming this problem. The data that your suppliers send you was never designed for your catalog. It was designed for theirs. The attributes reflect how they classify their products internally, and their taxonomy matches their product lines, not your customer's search behavior. The descriptions assume a buyer who already speaks the manufacturer's language. Remember, these are brands and they have a need to stand apart from their competition. So they're going to speak their brand language. This doesn't necessarily translate well to a distributor catalog who may sell multiple brands within the same category, who have competing or similar products. And many distributors have turned to aggregators or industry syndicators to close this gap. And they do close part of it. In fact, let's think about this. If you have 60% of your catalog coming from data aggregators, that's real value, because that has done a lot of the heavy lift for you in terms of gathering that product data. But even if you did have 60%, you are going to still have the other 40% to contend with. And by the way, now you have 2 data models, sometimes 3, 4, 5. The more sources that you have for collecting manufacturer product data, the more data models you're going to have to translate into one consistent buyer experience. So the translation problem doesn't go away, even if it's solved at a high level between a manufacturer and a distributor group. Through an aggregator, it just moves the problem downstream. And now it creates a backlog for your commerce team. Your customers don't experience your data sources, nor do they care. They experience your catalog. And inconsistency will erode trust, whether it comes from a direct supplier feed or an aggregator or any combination of data sources. This is why your catalog always feels like it's one step behind, not because your team isn't working hard enough, but because they're dealing with a structural translation problem that is yet to be fully solved in this industry. So here's some things that I've seen across the industry through years of working with distributors and manufacturers. And maybe you can relate to some of these. But how about this? A supplier sends a spec sheet of like 40 different attributes, but none of them actually matches what you have in your PIM. Or an aggregator uses different naming conventions than your direct supplier data for the same exact product. I've also seen the same exact product appearing twice with slightly different descriptions from 2 different sources. Inconsistent units of measure across sources, creating downstream ordering errors. Yikes. And a buyer searching for a product and finding 3 slightly different versions of the same item. Yes, I have seen it. So what is the answer? Like most hard things in life, there is no easy button. It takes ownership, accountability, and discipline. But there's hope. Let me share a few best practices that I've seen other world class distributors implement to get their data and their catalog operations on track. Tip number one is to audit your data sources holistically, suppliers and data aggregators together. Most teams simply do not audit where the data is coming from. Very good practice for you to consider running is to audit every data source, direct supplier feeds, aggregators, internal legacy data against a single catalog standard. Your standard built around your customers. And industry standards exist to help with this. IDEA in the electrical industry, ACEs and PIEs in the automotive aftermarket industry. Just a couple of examples where the industry has gotten together and said, we need a better way to define what our products look like downstream. These frameworks were created specifically to reduce the translation burden between manufacturers and distributors. And when suppliers adhere to them consistently, they're a meaningful head start. But don't assume that your suppliers are adhering to them consistently. Part of your audit should be checking actual standards adherence across your supplier base, not just whether a supplier claims to support a standard, but whether the data they're sending actually reflects it. What you're mapping for is two different things: gaps that are structural and gaps that are just messy. And the fix is slightly different in each case. And you cannot prioritize correctly until you know exactly which problem you're solving. This is why when we work with clients, we usually recommend starting with a data audit. Tip number two is to own your own taxonomy and schema and stop inheriting it from your suppliers. One of the most common and most costly mistakes I see distributors make is organizing their catalog around the way that manufacturers or product data aggregators organize their catalogs. This is a problem because it does not match the way your specific customer base wants to search for a product. When a catalog is created, you need to think about who it's created for. Your customers and their needs are different than your needs or the manufacturer's needs for brand differentiation. Your taxonomy should reflect your customer's language and intent, not your supplier's product lines, not your aggregator's category structure, yours. This matters because taxonomy is foundational. It affects search. It affects navigation. It affects whether a buyer finds what they're looking for or gives up and calls a rep. If your taxonomy was inherited from an upstream source or pieced together incrementally over time, it might be time to consider a refresh. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is a taxonomy and schema you own, one that reflects how your customers and prospects think about products and product categories, and that you can maintain and evolve over time as your catalog grows. That's a very different thing than inheriting someone else's classification system and trying to make it work. My suggestion for doing this is to bring in your subject matter experts for a taxonomy workshop. Get them in one room and buy them lunch. Get them to share their customer and industry experience with your catalog or your e-commerce team and map the catalog structure together. This is a great opportunity for your team to get sharper on the industry that you serve, and it will help make meaningful progress together as a team. This is well worth a couple days of your time because it will save your team months in the future. Tip number three is to create a supplier data scorecard. Not all suppliers' data is created equal, but most distributors treat it as if it is. Everything goes into the same ingestion process, and the problems get dealt with downstream, usually by someone who didn't create them. A supplier data scorecard changes that dynamic. Grade your suppliers on the things that actually determine catalog quality, and where relevant, how well they adhere to industry standards like IDEA or aces and pies. Share the scorecard with your supplier reps. It gives your internal team a clear prioritization framework. You know where to focus enrichment effort and where to push back on the source. And it signals to suppliers that data quality is a business expectation, not a courtesy. The best suppliers will respond. They want to be on your digital shelf, and some won't respond. And that tells you something important about where you're going to be doing manual work for a long time and where you may need outside help to compensate. To wrap things up, I'll say this, that the translation gap between manufacturer product data and your catalog isn't a reflection of your team's capability. It's a structural problem that this industry has been trying to solve for decades through aggregators, through industry standards, through better supplier portals. All of those things have helped, but none of them eliminate the problem entirely. What you can control is how clearly you understand your gaps, how deliberately you own your own taxonomy, and how consistently you hold your data sources accountable. That is where the leverage is. If this resonated with something that you're currently working through, I'd love to continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I share things like this regularly, and I'm always open to hearing what you're seeing in your own organization. And if you're finding value in this show, the best thing you can do for me as a way to say thanks is to share it with a colleague who's navigating the same challenges. These conversations get better when the right people are in them. Digital commerce isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the right thing in the right order, the right way. I'm Matt Johnson, and I'll see you next time on Frictionless Commerce.